Number 10. The Lady of Elche. Back in 1997, archaeologists found an amazing artifact inside a private estate in Spain. The artifact was a statue, a simple bust of a woman's head. But it's actually hiding its ancient age. It comes from the 4th century BCE and depicts a woman wearing some kind of strange headdress, something that looks similar to something worn by Native American tribes. The statue came to be known as the Lady of Elche. The amazing part of this mystery is that nobody knows exactly who the lady is supposed to represent. The headdress was probably used in ceremonies, suggesting the woman may have been some kind of priestess. The statue was discovered with traces of red, white, and blue paint, very patriotic. So it was once extremely colorful. But nobody can say for sure where the sculpture originated. Some say it came from the ancient Iberian culture, while others believe it has a direct link with Tanit, the old goddess of Carthage. There are even some wilder theories that claim the woman could be a goddess from the lost culture of Atlantis. How cool would that be? Number 9. Jamestown smoking pipes. At Jamestown, fragments of personal smoking pipes dating back 400 years have been found. For those not familiar with Jamestown, it was the first permanent settlement created by English settlers in the New World, or what is now known as the United States of America. The pipes likely belonged to some of the most prominent men in early American history. According to William Kelso, the director of archaeology for historic Jamestown, finding the pipes has brought to light the complicated political and social networks left behind at the settlement's site. These personal pipes were crafted out of clay, with archaeologists estimating they were made between 1608 and 1610. This was a pretty mysterious time in Virginia history. We need to look at just what the settlers of Jamestown were up to. A lot of their success as a settlement depended on doing well for their investors, the Virginia Company. This is who bankrolled the settlers of Jamestown. The pipes suggest that those living in Jamestown were making them in order to butter up their investors when they visited. However, the exact purpose of the mysterious pipes is still unknown. Number 8. Stolen armor. 40 years ago, ancient armor was stolen from the Louvre Museum in Paris under mysterious and dubious circumstances. The thief was never apprehended, and the case was never solved. Nobody ever found out how the armor was even stolen. Recently, these pieces of armor were finally found. A military antique expert called the authorities after someone contacted him looking for advice regarding a luxurious helmet and piece of body armor inside their family's collection. After a brief investigation, the pieces of armor were identified as the stolen loot from the museum. Although the mystery of the theft on May 31st, 1983 was never solved, the pieces were finally brought back to the museum. Even more interesting are the artifacts themselves. The pieces of armor are believed to have been made in Milan, Italy, sometime between 1560 and 1580 during the Renaissance. Nobody knows too much about the armor and helmet, other than that they were likely used as ornaments by a rich member of society. The head of heritage artworks at the Louvre compared the set of armor to that of a modern luxury car, giving you a good idea of just how expensive and prestigious these items were roughly 700 years ago. Although an exact price tag has never been put on the pieces, it's likely their value increased due to their strange history. Number 7. The missing gold artifacts. Father Carlos Crespi Croce was born in Italy in 1891. He was a monk who dedicated much of his life to charity. He also resided in the small town of Cuenca, Ecuador, for over 50 years. During this time, he became close to the indigenous people in the area, who often gave him gifts in the form of ancient artifacts. How kind of them. The indigenous people said many of the artifacts came from subterranean tunnels tangled deep inside the jungle. Even more amazing is that the artifacts looked oddly similar to other precious relics discovered in the Far East. This is one of the most interesting and mysterious stories of treasure in the world. To this day, the source of the bizarre artifacts has never been discovered, and some explorers have even been murdered by indigenous people in their hunt to find it. Must be a secret worth protecting. Father Crespi long suggested that the artifacts were somehow linked to the ancient civilization of Babylon. He housed the artifacts in a small museum in Ecuador, but so far as the story goes, mainstream archaeologists weren't happy about his accusations, and somebody mysteriously burned down the museum, which destroyed all the artifacts he had acquired, except for a few that remained untouched by the fire. Before the father died, he hid the remaining artifacts, and they have never been found. One rumor suggests they were shipped to the Vatican and are currently being held in secret down in their archives. Where do you think the artifacts are hidden? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. The oldest spear. In Texas, archaeologists found what they say could be the oldest weapon ever discovered in North America's history, and nobody knows who it once belonged to. The weapon comes in the form of a spear tip, and it's been dated back 15,500 years. The fragment had once been part of a larger weapon, probably used to hunt bigger game like bison or moose. According to popular mechanics, the weapon was discovered on a piece of somebody's property by a team of researchers from Texas A&M and the University of Texas. It appears to predate even the famous Clovis culture, often thought to be the oldest group of humans to inhabit the Americas. The Clovis originally appeared 13,000 years ago, 2,500 years after this weapon was crafted, which begs the question of who the weapon was made by, and if an ancient civilization existed on the American continent farther back than scientists thought. Even with the discovery of the weapon, archaeologists are no closer to figuring out who was living in Texas all that time ago, or where exactly they came from. They can only guess that they were likely some of the earliest settlers on the continent, but scientists don't even have a name for them yet. Number 5. Rare Freedman's Badge. A resident of Myrtle Beach was out one day with his metal detector, slightly north of Mount Pleasant in the city of Charleston, when he came across an artifact of real historical significance. He was looking around the grounds of a construction site when his metal detector began to beep like crazy. He had found a button from the Revolutionary War. But wait, because there was something else buried in the ground near it. After digging about 4 inches deep, he pulled out something known as a Freedman's Badge. It had been lost underground for nearly 200 years. According to the metal detectorist himself, named Ralph Fields, he recognized it immediately, but had never seen one before, calling it a lightning strike of a discovery, a once-in-a-lifetime find. What is a Freedman's Badge exactly? It's a copper badge that was used in the 1700s in South Carolina before it was even declared a state, and before white slave owners ever feared a rebellion. Only a few hundred of these badges were made, and less than a dozen of them have been found. The city issued the medallions between the years of 1783 and 1789. At the time, there were less than 600 people of African descent living in Charleston as free citizens. They were required to have one of these badges and to display it on their person to signify that they were free. Otherwise, they would be imprisoned or questioned. But of course, this wasn't really a privilege. It was a way for the people at the time to police those of color. Number 4. Duck Pond Artifacts. During renovations of a small duck pond in Wisconsin, crews discovered some mysterious artifacts from around 1,000 years ago. It happened while they were dredging the pond. Dredging is the practice of removing settlements and debris that have settled over time on the bottom of bodies of water. Spears, knives, arrowheads, and fragments of pottery were all found during the dredging operation. The artifacts have been traced back to a mysterious American tribe that not a lot of people know about. Archaeologists refer to this enigmatic culture as the Mississippians, who, of course, got their name from being located near the Mississippi River. They believe the artifacts were left over by the Mississippians after leaving their great city of Cahokia. When the city was abandoned around 1,000 years ago, Cahokia was an ancient city estimated to be about 2,200 acres in land. The natives who left the settlement paddled upriver and set up multiple communities along the Mississippi. The treasures in Wisconsin were probably left behind by these very people. And what's really interesting is that the life and death of Mississippian culture has never really been able to be explained. Experts don't know why exactly they abandoned their capital, or where many of them went when they vanished without a trace. But the artifacts left behind remind us of their once great civilization. Number 3. Mysterious Skulls. In Tallahassee, a couple of skulls were found in Lake Jackson. At first, the community was worried that there was some kind of crazed murderer on the loose, dumping human heads into the lake. The lake was temporarily drained, and that was when all of the skulls were uncovered. But just recently, the Leon County Sheriff's Office announced that the skulls were not being investigated as part of a criminal investigation. Instead, the skulls likely have historic origins. They were handed over to archaeologists working with the National Park Services. According to Jeffrey Shanks, the man responsible for investigating the mysterious skulls, they could have come from an ancient site near the lake that nobody has ever found. Either 30 years or 13,000 years ago, the skulls were buried or disposed of in the lake and not found until today. The big mystery is trying to figure out where the skulls came from, and if there is a prehistoric site of interest located right under the locals' noses, maybe even underneath the lake bed itself. If that is the case, it's definitely worth investigating. Number 2. Black Death coins. In England, a guy with a metal detector made yet another mind-blowing discovery. 2 rare gold coins were unearthed that date back to the time of the Black Death in the middle of the 14th century, which killed millions of people. Each medieval coin had the image of Edward III, King of England, who first introduced gold as a material for making coins in 1344. Oddly enough, some of the first gold coins minted in England were considered failures, because they were valued at more than they were actually worth. It was a confusing time for currencies, as England tried to work out a system that made some kind of sense. The coins were found in Norfolk County in 2019, but it took a while for archaeologists to finish assessing them. The big mystery was trying to figure out why they were stuck in the ground and how they got there in the first place. Archaeologists have come up with 2 possible reasons. Either somebody lost a purse by accident and the coins were buried as the years went by, or it was part of a larger hidden hoard, and for whatever reason, 2 of the coins were left behind. Even today, the coins are very valuable. Each one is about 96% pure gold. Plus, considering their historical significance, they could fetch a lot of money at auction. Back in 1344, the 2 coins together would have been the equivalent of $16,700 in current money. Just imagine walking around with a pair of $8,000 bills in your pocket. We wouldn't mind trying that out. Number 1. Sunken Chinese relics. Mysterious Chinese artifacts have been discovered off the coast of Singapore, scattered around the floor of the ocean along with a pair of shipwrecks. One of which dates back to the 14th century, and the other all the way back to the 18th century. Both vessels, even though they are 400 years apart, were carrying Chinese ceramics as their main cargo. The ships sailed during what is known as the Temasek period of Singapore, around the time that it began appearing on maps in the Ming Dynasty between 1368 and 1644. The more recent vessel has been identified as the Shah Mun Cha, which sank in 1796 as it was on its way to India from China. The older vessel is the more mysterious one, with archaeologists not knowing its name, why it sank, or even where it was going. As for the artifacts, they were mostly pieces of pottery vessels, crafted in China to be traded with other kingdoms in the area. One of the scientists studying the artifacts says that a set of blue and white dishes that were recovered is one of the largest sets of its kind, remaining still intact from the period. Some of the heaviest artifacts discovered on the ships were 4 massive anchors weighing close to 2.5 tons apiece. The other finds include 14th century instruments such as tambourines and coconut shakers. Though they learned much, archaeologists must put more research into the 2 shipwrecks and recovered artifacts in order to learn more about the ocean-based trading of the time period.
Number 10. Bones, Explosives, and Locomotives. Dan Lopez is a Vernon, New Jersey-based modern-day explorer who has visited at least 179 abandoned mines and entered 50 or more throughout the northeastern U.S. Throughout his adventures, he's experienced an array of shocking and disturbing sights, including dynamite, bones, and even a ghost. Since 2003, Lopez has ventured into mines with other explorers too, who have traveled deep into forests and down deep shafts to find things like abandoned rail tracks, coal carts, and a rusting 19th century locomotive left frozen in time. According to a 2018 NorthJersey.com article documenting his investigations, one time Lopez almost fell into a crevice and to his death. Lopez also entered a mine in one town and amazingly emerged in another. His passion for mines is fueling an ongoing campaign to bring attention to their historic value, which he says the government seems intent on burying, both literally and figuratively, as sites are increasingly being reclaimed and filled in. Thankfully, Lopez has documented these eerie, forgotten sites through his photography, which can be found on his Flickr page. Number 9. Demonic Whispers. In 2016, while exploring the tunnels of a place called the Waldeck Mine, a YouTuber who goes by the name of Frank captured footage of a series of unexplainable overlapping whispers that he at first thought were birds or snakes. As soon as the man realized he was hearing something that was perhaps not of this world, he quickly turned around and hightailed it back toward the mine's entrance. The disturbing video appeared on the YouTube channel Exploring Abandoned Mines and has garnered over 6 million views since its debut 6 years ago. While many were shocked by what they heard when they watched the footage, CNET was quick to point out that the channel's profile page included a disclaimer stating, "Everything you see, hear, and read in all my videos is for entertainment purposes only, and should not be relied upon or construed as factual, correct, or remotely accurate." Whether the video is real or not, and regardless of where it was filmed, it's certainly enough to make anyone think twice about venturing into an abandoned mine. Number 8. Klerksdorp Spheres. The Klerksdorp spheres are small, round, and disc-shaped objects that were collected from pyrophyllite mines near Ottosdal, South Africa. They range in diameter from 0.2 inches to almost 4 inches, 0.5 to 10 centimeters, and are composed of either hematite or wollastonite, mixed with small amounts of hematite and goethite, and in some cases pyrite. Since their discovery, the Klerksdorp sphere's origins have been heavily debated by experts and conspiracy theorists alike. Experts concluded that the objects are around 2.8 billion years old and were formed naturally by minerals occupying the space between sediments, much like how crystals are formed, and that their round shape and evenly spaced lines were caused by weathering. Conspiracy theorists, on the other hand, argue that the stones are too perfectly round to have formed naturally, and that they're evidence of ancient aliens having existed. Another bizarre story surrounding the Klerksdorp spheres claims that a man brought some of them to NASA for scientists to examine, and that they told him the balls were formed in a zero-gravity environment. Not surprisingly, there's no reliable evidence to back up these far-flung tales and theories, and researchers who analyzed the spheres disproved outlandish claims of them having perfect balance or being harder than steel. Still, the spheres are fascinating in their own right due to their age, and especially because they truly do seem too perfectly round to be anything but man-made. Number 7. Mystery Monster. In 2016, in the Sakha Republic of far northeastern Russia, Siberian miners unearthed the demonic-looking mummified corpse of a small, unidentified animal. Even those who drew the more reasonable conclusion that it was actually a creature of this earth were puzzled about what exactly it was. The miners who worked at the Udakni diamond mine suggested that the so-called monster mummy was a newly discovered dinosaur species. Meanwhile, experts erred on the more rational side and surmised that it was a young wolverine. They drew this conclusion based on its strong jaws and large canine teeth, which are characteristic of the species, but pointed out that the creature could also be a sable or a ferret-like animal called a pine marten. The remains were transported to Yakutsk for further examination, but one expert named Darian Basinger claimed that she knew what the carcass was just by looking at it. Speaking to Earth Touch News, Basinger, who's worked with mummified remains for years, explained that the animal looked like a Russian fitch, also known as a polecat, which is actually not a cat. This falls in line with other experts' belief that the creature comes from the mustelid family of weasels, ferrets, minks, and martens. Basinger further added that the corpse dried out instead of liquefying because of the region's frigid temperatures, and that the dead body was probably relatively new since the mine has been open for decades. But she admits that without properly analyzing the animal, she could be wrong about its identity. Number 6. Van Meter Creature. Over the course of just a few days back in 1903, the small Iowa town of Van Meter was allegedly terrorized by a stinky half-human, half-animal monster, which had bat wings and a horn emanating a blinding light. It became known as the Van Meter Creature or the Van Meter Visitor. It emerged from a local mine and spent its first night flying across rooftops. It seemed immune to the gunshots that townsfolk repeatedly fired anytime they saw it. The local doctor and bank teller managed to get a poster cast of the monster's three-toed tracks, and another resident described the creature as hopping like a kangaroo. It was also spotted perched atop a telephone pole. Eventually, locals chased the unwelcome visitor back to the mine, where they heard a demonic sound coming from within. A bright light appeared, and the creature appeared with a smaller version of itself, and they descended down a mine shaft together. Nobody ever saw the Van Meter creature again, and for over a century, the mystery surrounding the bizarre incident has lingered. No evidence was ever found to suggest that the ordeal was a hoax, but tangible signs of the Van Meter creature being real are also conspicuously lacking. Number 5. The Saltmen of Iran. 1700 years ago, around 300 AD, a group of men were working together in a mine in what is now Iran when the roof collapsed and crushed them to death. None of them were discovered until 1993, when miners at the Cherabad salt mine in Zanjan province found the first body, belonging to a man with long, flowing white hair and sporting a gold earring. His remnants didn't look nearly as old as radiocarbon dating proved them to be, leading experts to believe that the dryness of the environment helped to preserve his body while the surrounding salt sucked moisture from his skin. In other words, the man was naturally mummified. 5 more saltmen, as they've become known, have been found since. The second mummy was discovered just 50 feet away from the first in 2004, and in 2005, 2 more were found. The last 2, one of which is actually a woman, were discovered in 2007. Mining practices were stopped at the site in 2008, and it was declared an archaeological site, making it available to researchers. Experts have learned a lot from the mummies, some of whom were so well preserved their internal organs remained intact. One man's stomach contained tapeworm eggs, showing that he ate lots of raw and undercooked meat. Other artifacts were also remarkably well preserved thanks to the salt, including a leather boot containing a foot, iron knives, a pant leg, a silver needle, a sling, leather rope, pottery shards, textile fragments, a walnut, and more. 4 of the 6 mummies found are currently on display in the positions they were found in at the Archaeology Museum in Zanjan. Number 4. Red-haired giants. Lovelock Cave is a small cavern in Churchill County, Nevada, measuring just 150 feet long by 35 feet wide. Humans first used the cave as far back as 2580 BC, and around 1000 BC, people began living in it full-time. Altogether, the human presence inside Lovelock Cave spans roughly 4,000 years. In 1911, 2 men named David Pugh and James Hart were at the site mining bat guano to use as fertilizer. While removing a thick layer of the material measuring somewhere between 3 and 6 feet deep and weighing an estimated 250 tons, 226.8 metric tons, the pair found a collection of artifacts. Unfortunately, they only kept the ones that they deemed to be interesting, and a lot of important archaeological information was likely lost in the process. Eventually, the duo stumbled upon too many objects to continue mining guano in substantial quantities. Their fascinating finds allegedly included the remains of a humongous 6-foot man with red hair. This gave rise to legends of a group of red-haired cannibalistic giants called the Siteka, who supposedly existed in the area centuries ago and stood at up to 10 feet, 3 meters tall. Modern science challenges these stories, citing how the pigment in human hair is unstable after death and can be changed by numerous factors, including temperature and soil content. A study on a collection of bones that was carried out during the mid-1970s determined that there was possibly a separate, more aggressive tribe that passed through the area and terrorized the Paiute, and that its members could have been around 6 feet, 1.8 meters tall on average, according to Nevadagram. As anthropologists pointed out, the myth is likely to bolster over the facts because it's simply more entertaining. Number 3. Dead miners and illicit villages. South African police recently announced the discovery of 20 dead bodies of suspected illegal miners near an abandoned gold mine shaft outside Johannesburg. The corpses were severely burned and wrapped in white plastic bags, according to authorities, who said that they're working to determine the causes of death. A police spokesman said that they believe the individuals were illegal miners that are commonly known as zamazamas, which means try your luck in Zulu. At any given time, thousands of zamazamas are operating in the country, with most working in Johannesburg, according to the South African Human Rights Commission, SAHRC. Typically run by crime syndicates, illegal mining is extremely dangerous. Those who dare or are desperate enough to do it run the risk of being hurt or dying from explosives, toxic fume inhalation, collapsing mine shafts, and gang violence, The Guardian reported. There's no shortage of places for them to operate in, with derelict mines numbering around 6,000. Even more shocking, the people who work in these mines spend up to 6 months at a time underground, living in small makeshift cities, where commodities like food, alcohol, cell phone minutes, and sex are sold at wildly inflated prices. Number 2. Ice Age Mining Camp. Between 12,000 and 10,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, indigenous miners in what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula risked their lives to mine a pigment called red ochre, traveling deep into pitch-dark caves to retrieve it. As glaciers melted and sea levels rose, these caves became filled with water and were forgotten about. In 2017, cave divers explored these impressively well-preserved remnants that the miners left behind, including charcoal from fires that were lit to provide light, stone tools, mining pits, and the red ochre pigment itself. Researchers have long known that the region's earliest human inhabitants ventured into the now submerged caves in the area, known as Quintana Roo, as evidenced by skeletons that have been recovered from there. Until recently, however, nobody knew exactly why people went into the caves. They noticed unexplainable signs of a human presence, including rocks that were out of place and stacked on top of one another, according to study co-author Samuel McComb, who spoke with Live Science. Nobody knows what ancient indigenous people used red ochre for. The samples found at the site contain high levels of arsenic, suggesting the possibility that they were used as a bug repellent. It may have also been used as an antiseptic or sunblock. Red ochre likely had ritualistic uses as well, including in rock paintings and burials. But for now, its purposes remain a mystery. Number 1. Murder victims. 2 Utah families were shaken to the core when 17-year-old Berlene Breeze Otteson and 18-year-old Riley Powell disappeared just days after Christmas in 2017. Friends and family searched over 40 mines, but failed to find the missing teens. Months later, police found Otteson and Powell's bodies in Juab County, Utah. Both victims were bound, stabbed, and tossed at the bottom of an abandoned mine shaft. Outraged that his girlfriend Morgan Henderson had welcomed the young couple into their home, a man named Jared Baum allegedly committed the murders, killing Powell as his girlfriend watched, then fatally slitting her throat. Baum had reportedly warned Henderson against having male friends over and was furious that she disobeyed this rule, especially since she had briefly dated Powell in the past before the two ultimately decided they were better off as friends. Henderson initially lied and told police she knew nothing of the young couple's whereabouts, but when she was pulled over at a later date and caught with the murder weapons, she confessed what she knew. Baum was charged with Powell and Ottenson's murders. 3 years later, the teens' families are still waiting for justice amid the ongoing trial, and Henderson is a key witness in the proceedings. If convicted, Baum could face the death penalty. Number 10. The Crocodile and the Backpacker. A crocodile in Australia got some very satisfying revenge after frightening a young backpacker who got the idea that it would be totally fun to bully and mock the marine reptile. The tourist spotted the crocodile from his fishing boat and wanted to get some pictures with it. Well, saltwater crocs are not the most photogenic things on the planet and aren't really into photo shoots. This particular beast was about 16 feet. The tourist teased and pointed at it while someone else snapped photos. This didn't make the crocodile very happy, and when it got close enough to the tourist, it tried to jump into his boat and bite his limbs off. The Israeli backpacker reacted quickly enough to escape the jaws of the crocodile, but he was left severely shaken. He was quoted later as saying, "I didn't realize crocs were so aggressive." But really, who in their right mind doesn't instinctively know that a giant green lizard isn't aggressive? It's like reaching out and trying to touch a rattlesnake, not realizing that, it's a deadly snake. In the end, the tourist went about the rest of his fishing trip with both eyes open for marauding crocodiles. Number 9. Rabid fox attack. A wild fox in Rochester Mills finally had enough. It was tired of being treated like a pesky raccoon and decided one morning it was going to strike back against the rude people in the neighborhood who weren't paying him any respect. It was about 10:30 in the morning when the fox strolled into the yard of Sylvia Work as she was weeding her flower bed. When Sylvia went to wash her hands, the fox was there ready to strike. It began running straight for her, hell-bent on tearing the old lady to shreds. Sylvia screamed for help, but nobody came. The fox had almost completed its planned vengeance. It was biting her in the leg, puncturing her skin with its tiny teeth, and cutting apart her hands as it scratched and scratched. Thankfully, her 14-year-old neighbor rushed to her rescue. He had heard the woman screaming from next door and came to see what the fuss was about. The teenage neighbor grabbed hold of the fox while another neighbor ran to their house to get a dog kennel. After the terrifying ordeal, the fox was handed over to the Pennsylvania Game Commission and Sylvia had to be taken to the hospital for treatment. She just better hope the fox is never let loose again, or it'll probably go back to finish the job. Number 8. The bear selfie. A man who tried to take a selfie with a bear without asking the animal's permission ended up dead. It's really as simple as that. The bear couldn't believe the man's audacity when he strolled straight up to the bear, who was wounded by the way, and tried to snap a picture with the wild animal as if they were best friends. The bear was not impressed. Instead of smiling for the camera, the bear attacked the rude man with both paws, slapping the sense out of him. The guy was dead on the spot, ripped to shreds by the wild beast. If you're wondering just how this guy came face to face with a bear in the first place, it happened while he was driving with a group of friends home from a wedding that they had just attended. He stopped on the side of the road to relieve himself in the forest. That was when he saw the bear a short way off, minding its own business. The man zipped himself up, pulled out his camera, and then went and got himself killed. Number 7. Pig escape. The love of a mother pig for her piglets knows no bounds. A mother pig recently got some pretty sweet revenge on a farmer after she made a daring escape. It happened when the pig, whose name is Matilda, escaped from a farm in the United Kingdom. She was pregnant and didn't want to give birth on the farm where she knew her babies would eventually be slaughtered and probably eaten. So she managed to escape the farm and find a safe place to give birth in a nearby forest. She was then spotted by a dog walker who got a hold of the Brinsley Animal Rescue. The animal conservationists aren't allowed to just steal the pig and her piglets, as they did technically belong to the farmer. But what they did do was start a huge campaign to have the pigs and the piglets brought to a home where they could live the rest of their lives in peace and happiness. The campaign was a failure. The farmer figured out where the pigs were and he went and took them back to the farm. But Matilda's revenge wasn't over just yet. At this point, her story was national news. There was a huge protest after the public found out that the farmer had taken the pig and her piglets back, and facing immense pressure, he finally relinquished the family of pigs. Matilda won the battle and earned a full life for her and her babies, and the farmer was thoroughly annoyed and humiliated. He also lost whatever money he would have made by slaughtering the pig family. Number 6. Walrus sinks Navy vessel. A Russian naval ship was on a scientific expedition in the Arctic when it came under attack by an angry walrus. The expedition was part of a joint mission with the Russian Geographical Society. The ship anchored near a small archipelago slightly south of the North Pole called Franz Josef Land. The crew were about to make landfall in an inflatable boat when they were attacked by the angry female walrus who was simply trying to defend her territory. The rude Russians were basically trespassing, so the walrus took her revenge. The researchers were forced to flee their inflatable vessel as the walrus made her assault. The servicemen were able to get away, but the walrus did so much damage to their boat that it sank. They still made it to shore and got away from the walrus, but they were stranded from the main vessel. They also had to run out of the area because the walrus was still on the prow, waiting to finish off the job. Eventually, they were rescued by the main ship, but it was quite an ordeal for the crew. Number 5. Revenge of the street dogs. A pack of street dogs got some very juicy revenge on a man in China. It happened when the guy was trying to park his car. There was a stray dog sitting in his parking spot, so he got out of his vehicle and kicked the dog in its face. The stray dog whimpered and ran away, and then the man moved his car into the parking spot. After he'd gone, the dog returned with a small group of dog friends to seek revenge. They absolutely trashed this guy's vehicle. About 5 stray dogs returned to the parking lot and began biting and chewing on his windshield wipers, his fenders, and everything else they could get their teeth on. They did thousands of dollars worth of damage to this guy's car and then ran away before he could show up. The attack was even witnessed by a neighbor who filmed the devastation. He probably thought it was pretty funny, and so did the dogs, but the owner of the vehicle was furious. Unfortunately for him, his insurance probably doesn't cover animal revenge. But maybe he'll think about that the next time he wants to kick a dog. Number 4. Cecil's Revenge. In 2015, an American dentist named Walter Palmer paid $50,000 to a local ranger in Zimbabwe to lure Cecil the lion out of his nature park. Palmer then shot and killed the lion using a bow and arrow. He killed the most majestic cat on the planet and made things extremely difficult for himself. We don't need to talk about how disgusting Walter Palmer is or why killing lions is bad. We all know why. What we can say is that Cecil the lion, even in death, got her revenge in the form of karma. Walter Palmer quickly became the most hated man in America. This is what the internet did to Walter Palmer after he killed the lion. First, they published his phone number. Secondly, they discovered the address of his dental practice and posted it online. His business page on Facebook was absolutely ruined. Thousands of people called him a scumbag to the point where the page had to be deleted. His Yelp account was also totally ruined. In the end, Walter Palmer didn't lose his practice, and he continued to be a dentist, but he has to live the rest of his life as one of the most unanimously hated people in American history. And yes, he's probably lost a significant amount of business. Number 3. Plague of Crows. Just when citizens of Rome thought it was safe to come out of their houses following the worst of the coronavirus pandemic, the crows decided to get some revenge. It's not clear what exactly sparked the plague of crows that descended on Rome in 2021, but according to the New York Times, they were out of control. Locals were forced to shield themselves with umbrellas, people pulled jackets over their heads, and some brandished wooden sticks to beat the crows away. The angry birds were swooping from the rooftops, grabbing women by their hair, scratching people with their talons and pecking at them with their beaks. Believe it or not, Rome is almost always under constant siege by angry birds. Every year, the exploding crow population takes their anger out on annoying humans, and when that's all said and done, predatory seagulls descend upon the city and drop bird poop on everyone's heads. It's actually become something of a war, as local residents beg the government to get rid of the crows and to stop the birds from settling in Rome. This only makes the birds angrier, and the crow attacks get more vicious each and every year. The reason crows love living in Rome is that there is so much trash, garbage, and mice for them to eat. The humans are simply in their way. Number 2. Revenge of the Lioness. During a circus performance in Russia, a tormented lioness fought back against her cruel trainer in a shocking display of feline revenge. It happened during a performance done by the Ural Traveling Circus. Terrified spectators shouted and scrambled out of the circus tent as Vega the lioness went wild and turned on her tamer. Her tamer, one Maxim Orlov, was trying to get the animal to perform like a circus freak. It was all part of his act. But the lioness was tired of performing. She pounced on Maxim with her jaws open and her teeth showing. She bit him multiple times before other members of the circus were able to get the big cat off. Maxim had to be transported to the hospital immediately, though he did manage to survive his injuries. There was also a woman in the crowd who witnessed the attack and was so shocked that she had an epileptic seizure. As for Vega, the poor lioness will be traded to a zoo for a smaller lion cub that's easier to control. It's good news for Vega, as hopefully she can have a relatively normal life outside the circus. It's bad news for the newest lion cub, who will most likely be taken away from their family and forced to literally jump through flaming hoops. Number 1. Drunk Monkey Revenge. In India, there's a monkey named Kalua who has been imprisoned for his entire life. That's right, this monkey actually got a full lifetime prison sentence. He's been locked up in a Kanpur zoo following a wild rampage in which he got wasted on stolen booze and attacked at least 250 people. According to the New York Post, zookeepers at the park were hoping to assimilate the monkey into their little monkey society. However, now he's been deemed too dangerous to live among his own kind, and he certainly can't be out in the wild getting drunk and attacking people. Based on local reports, the monkey had originally belonged to some kind of occultist hermit, who fed Kalua a steady diet of hard liquor and meat harvested from other monkeys. The occultist basically turned the creature into an alcoholic cannibal. The occultist was found dead, and the neglected monkey took out his anger and frustration on the neighborhood people, swinging from building to building, breaking into people's houses, and clawing women and children in the face. The rampage went on for quite some time before Kalua was eventually captured by animal trappers and delivered to the zoo. According to the zoo director, there's been absolutely no change in his behavior, and he remains highly aggressive to the outside world. 3 years after the monkey's brutal rampage, the zookeepers have all but given up on it. He'll be kept in solitary confinement for the rest of his life. It's extremely sad because it's not the monkey's fault he was raised that way, but it's just the way things turned out. Thanks for watching. Which of these animals do you think got the best revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more amazing videos right here.